Today we're going to talk about one of the more complicated parables of Yeshua, and that is the parable of the wicked husbandmen. This parable appears in all three synoptic gospels, with slight differences between Matthew and Luke, but I'm going to read the parable from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 20, verse 9. Actually, I'm going to only tell you the parable so that I will look at the camera and it'd be easier for all of us. Yeshua is telling another parable of the kingdom. And in this parable, he is using the model of the vineyard. The vineyard that the owner owns, the king owns, and he hires it to tenants. And the tenants are supposed to give the owner, during the harvest time, his due price, his profit. And instead of giving the profit, they beat up his servants, his stewards that come to the vineyard to collect. And they do it 3 times. And in the end, the owner says, okay, maybe they will respect my son. I'll send my son there. Surely they will honor my son. But instead of honoring the son, they plot to kill the son. And in the end, the owner comes and he kills the wicked tenants, casts them outside. And he says a verse from Psalm 118, the stone that the builders rejected became the head of the cornerstone, and says that the vineyard will be taken, the kingdom will be taken from the wicked tenants and given to others. Obviously, in Christian history and the history of exegesis of the New Testament, this is one of the main texts that has been used to teach replacement theology. God took the vineyard away from Israel and he gave it to another people. And it's easy to do that when you take it out of its historical context. Now we must remember that when Yeshua is teaching in parables, all the parables in the Bible and all the parables anywhere, each parable has something hidden in it. If it could have been said openly in the context in which it is said, there would be no need of a parable. Why complicate things? The reason that there are parables, because there is a secret of the kingdom, like Yeshua said to his disciples when they asked him, why do you teach with parables? He said, because unto you has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom, and to others it has not been given to know the secrets of the kingdom. So here we have this parable that is used traditionally in Christian exegesis as justification for replacement theology. And we've got to essentially decipher the parable, decipher what is the secret in it. So first of all, the first clue that we have is that it's a vineyard. And in Isiah chapter 5, we read the song of the vineyard. A person had a vineyard, he wanted to have good grapes from that vineyard, and he cleared the stones, he made a fence, he made a tower to protect the vineyard, he made a wine press, and he waited for the harvest time of the grapes so that he could have good grapes to make wine out of them. But instead of having good grapes, the vineyard produced bad grapes that were not usable. So the owner of the vineyard calls the people around to judge between him and the vineyard. And he complains that, he did everything that he could to get good fruit. He invested all his ability to get some benefit out of the vineyard, and instead of getting a benefit, he got bad grapes. So what should he do with the vineyard? He will break down the fence so that the vineyard will be trampled. He will stop pruning the vines so that they will not bring good fruit. He will, in the end, destroy the vineyard. And he turns to Israel and he says, Israel, you are the vineyard. And then he brings this wonderful prophecy of comfort, because God always kind of sandwiches his reprimand, his discipline, with some sugar around it, and doesn't let Israel or anybody of his children ever lose hope that they can improve and that they can please God in the end. That's the parable of the vineyard from Isaiah chapter 5. Now Yeshua is using the same motif about the vineyard and is not saying that it's Israel. He's talking within Israel. And we have parallel parables and stories in rabbinical literature that is more or less contemporary with the time of Yeshua that use the same motif of the wicked husbandman. Let me read you one from ancient Midrash called Sifrei Deuteronomy, on Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 9. It says, for the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob is the lot of his inheritance. It may be compared to a king who had a field and gave it to tenants. The tenants began to rob it of the products of the field. So he took it from them and gave it to their children, and they became wickeder than the previous. He gave it to their children's children, but they became wickeder than the previous. A son was born to him, and he said to them, get out of what is mine. It is impossible for you to be in it. Give me my portion, and I will ratify it. Interesting parable in rabbinical literature that has some of the same elements that Yeshua's parable has. You have a person, a king, who has a field. He hires tenants, he gives it to the tenants are wicked, they don't give the dues that they owe, and he has a son, and then he lets the son inherit that field and kicks the tenants out. Very great similarity between this rabbinical parable and the parable of Yeshua. And we have some other parables in rabbinical literature that clarify some of the things. For example, in one of the parables that we find in Exodus Rabbah, the wicked tenants are the nations. That they receive a portion from the Lord, a portion of His commandments, and they squander the commandments. They are not interested to keep them. Then they come again and they receive another portion, and they squander it again. And in the end, the son in the rabbinical parable here is Israel. And the son comes to collect from the wicked tenants, and they decide to kill the son. And then it brings exactly the same verse that Yeshua brings from Psalm 118. The stone that the builders rejected became the head of the cornerstone. In other words, the keystone that holds the arch, the building together. And it's Israel in this parable of the rabbis. Now, when we read in the context of the first century, Yeshua's parable, who is he talking about? At the end of the parable, we are told who is talking about. The chief priests and the scribes understood the parable better than Christian theologians have. They understood that Yeshua is talking about them, and then they plot to kill him. In other words, he's not talking about the nation of Israel to be replaced by the church. He's talking about within the time and the context of history in which Yeshua lived in the first century, the Sadducees and the priests were the ruling parties. They held the government until the year 43. Majority of the Sanhedrin was Sadducee. Only in the year 43 the Pharisees get the majority in the Sanhedrin, which means that the ruling party that is being given charge of God's vineyard have been the wicked husbandmen, that they got rich, they got wicked, they got corrupt, they bought and sold the high priesthood to people that were not even from the tribe of Levi. Some of them were even converts, like the house of Herod that were converts. And they essentially misused their authority. And Yeshua is telling the people that are hearing him, listen, that's going to change. God is going to remove those wicked husbandmen. He will put his son, the true Israel. And of course, at the head of Israel is the ultimate Jew, Yeshua, the son of David. I want you to think about this parable. In summary, I will say that it does not stand the reason that this parable is talking that God is going to replace Israel with another nation or with the church. Because we read very clearly, Paul asked this question in Romans 11 verse 1 and 2, as God rejected his people whom he foreknew, the answer that Paul gives is very different than the answer that most of Christian theological faculties have given. The Christians say, yes, God has replaced Israel with the church, and each church thinks that it's replaced Israel with it. The Catholics think it's replaced it. The Presbyterian think that they're the ones that replaced Israel. And none of it is true. Paul's answer is different than what most Christian theologians have given. God forbid, I am a Jew in the present tense. Not I was a Jew and now I became a Baptist, but I am a Jew. I am an Israelite. I am from the tribe of Benjamin. God has not replaced Israel. So whoever interprets this parable that God has taken the kingdom from Israel and given it to the church is contradicting what Paul said. So keep studying the Word of God. Next week we're going to talk about another very important parable. Tune in again, Netivyah or Joseph Shulam on YouTube.